even if we notice that a thought is silly or stupid, even if we don't resonate in our mind, it still impacts us. That's why, cognitive behavioral therapy is not about insight alone, because all of us have had an insight about certain behaviors that aren't working or thoughts that aren't working. And yet insight alone does not actually help us behave differently.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who's out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode.
Hey, welcome to The Exploding Human. My name is Bob Nickman. My guest today is Abby Lev, and we're going to be talking about cognitive behavioral therapy, among other things. But first, I would like to invite you to visit my website, theexplodinghuman.com. Over there, you can read synopses, see photos of my guests, listen to episodes, a little bio on myself. And there's also a YouTube channel where you can listen. That is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. As I said, my guest today is Abby Lev, and we're going to be talking about her work as a cognitive behavioral therapist, what it is, what it isn't, and how she works with people as well as corporations and companies to help people navigate their lives and to improve their situations. We talk a lot about how ideas and beliefs are formed in childhood and from experiences and how those carry through into our adult lives and inform our decisions, and how those thoughts and feelings can be changed over a period of time with recognizing those belief systems, finding out what works and what doesn't work, and changing those things. And we're going to be talking about how she works with people to do that. We also get into a really interesting discussion on narcissistic personality disorder, something I've been really curious about because the word gets tossed around quite a bit. And Abby explains it extremely well with some great examples. And so let's just jump into this thing because it's really was a great talk. Here she is. This is Abby Lev. Abby, it's so great to meet you on a Sunday afternoon, which is usually not a time when people are available, and I'm so glad you are today, because so am I. And we're going to be talking about all kinds of cool stuff. Cognitive behavioral therapy will be probably our first topic, because I know that's kind of your field of expertise and where you really work a lot with not only individuals, but with companies. So let's just start with the simple thing of what is it? I know what it is, but does everybody know what it is? Let's find out.
So, right now the field is so split, and people are really into somatic therapy, for example. But in reality, the interventions around somatic therapy have always existed, right? There's like this idea that cognitive therapy is just about thoughts, or somatic therapy is just about sensations. But actually, cognitive behavioral therapy is the idea that our thoughts, our feelings, our sensations, our, conditioning impacts our behaviors. And the way that we work with difficult thoughts and feelings that stop us from moving towards new behaviors in the way that we want to be is I work with people using third wave cognitive behavioral therapy, where we help people detach from difficult thoughts. So we make space from the content of our mind so it doesn't stop us from taking new actions. And then we do exercises to make friends with difficult feelings and sensations and make space for them. Mindfulness, self-compassion, because the more we're willing to sit with the difficult feelings, the sensations in our body, then they're less likely to stop us from doing new behaviors that are in alignment with our values.
Yeah, I'm always amazed at some of the things that I either learned or figured out for myself at a young age that later on I went, that's not working at all. That doesn't serve me at all. And where did I learn this? And how can I unlearn it? And some of the stuff is so powerful because of I think the young age that some of this stuff happens. I'll give you something really simple.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't affect my life at all, but it was a thought, because my mother told me at one point when I was a kid, never date a redhead because they have terrible tempers. Okay. Now I don't know where she got this idea. It's not even a big thing. I never really, I did actually date a couple of redheads along the line. They didn't have terrible tempers, but that idea was in the back of my mind. I knew it was stupid when she said it, but she believed it. She absolutely believed it. Now, maybe she had an experience herself. Maybe just one experience. Maybe she had two. Maybe that was, something her parents told her. I don't know. And this is very light. This is not a big thing.
Right.
That's why I picked it. But I never forgot that she told me this as if it was a fact. It was, right. And I think that's the power of it. Like when you're taught something or told something or something happens, it becomes a fact, not just an incident.
Right. And that's why, third wave cognitive behavioral therapy focuses less on changing thoughts and more about changing our relationship to our thoughts, so that we don't see them as facts, so that we see them as hypotheses that we can always test. So I always tell my clients, every thought you have is a hypothesis to be tested, never a fact. And I think another interesting point that you were making is that even if we notice that a thought is silly or stupid, even if we don't resonate in our mind, it still impacts us. That's why, cognitive behavioral therapy is not about insight alone, because all of us have had an insight about certain behaviors that aren't working or thoughts that aren't working. And yet insight alone does not actually help us behave differently.
Yeah. One of the things that you hear a lot with people is, I don't want to do X, Y, or Z because it'll jinx this thing that I have. Now, the concept of jinxing is, to me, is a false premise also. But the fact that it exists, like don't walk under a ladder, you're going to get bad luck, or if a black cat crosses your path, you're going to have bad things happen. Who's the guy that thought of this? I'm going to assume it's a guy, because it's really, well, it could be a woman, but it's just like these things are so, ingrained in societies, and I'm sure they're different in various societies, that always crack me up. It's like, why? How is that a thing?
Probably the person who invented it has OCD, right? Because that's how the mind of someone with OCD functions. Like, it could be, we can all have superstitions, but if we become too rigid with the superstitions and start acting on them, we can all develop OCD.
How do you develop that as a youngster? It seems like it's an anxiety disorder. Like, I don't even like the word disorder half the time. It's because that can be kind of murky too. But the idea that, an anxiety, a condition exacerbated by anxiety, which is basically fear. So if you're getting scared about something, and so you do this repetitive, obsessive kind of behavior, it's almost like you're bargaining with the universe in some way to help you by being hyper vigilant about something, so the bad thing doesn't happen.
Yeah, like in OCD, we have an obsession and we believe something, and then we do a behavior that then relieves that anxiety. And the more we engage in that behavior, it's kind of like any addiction. It starts growing and growing. So if you're just starting with checking your sink before you leave your house, then you'll be checking the oven, then you'll be checking whether your door is locked. It continues to grow because it relieves the anxiety, and then you want more of it.
Yeah. Oh, I just remembered one I had as a little kid. This was unbelievable. And I knew it didn't make sense.
Right.
But I had this thing where I couldn't go to sleep at night if the drawers on my dresser weren't completely closed. So I would go to bed and I'd get up and I'd check them. I'd push them in. And then I'd get back in bed and think, maybe I pushed it a little hard and it came out a little bit. So I'd do it again. And I would do that with the dresser drawers and the closet door. And I remember thinking, this is not a good thing that I'm doing. This is not. And at some point, you kind of just go, ah. You got to stop. Now, I don't know what was going on in my life as a kid at that point that was making me so anxious that I had to do that. But I knew it was strange, and yet I couldn't stop it at the time.
Right? Like many behaviors of ours, we kind of have this rational part of our brain that knows it's not working, and yet we're still on autopilot repeating the same thing.
Now, do you get to the source of where that may have arisen, or you just kind of go, well, that's a symptom of the thing, and that's what we got to find? It doesn't necessarily have to line up exactly with the behavior. How does that work? Let's say I came to you with that very issue. I can't go to sleep at night because I'm worried something's going to happen. If something's going to come out of the drawer, I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe some demon. I don't know.
Right.
I'm laughing because I find this stuff so fascinating, and it's me. So, I'm thinking about like, what the heck was going on with little me at that time?
Yeah, in cognitive behavioral therapy, in my work with clients, that's not as important. The reason why is not so important. I tell my clients better to ask how or what do I do differently, or how do I feel, or what am I needing? Those are all better questions than why. But it's interesting because when we do the work and we just get through identifying the symptoms and working on them and doing the interventions, the why does come out. But the why is not necessary for the behavioral change. Nothing happens in a vacuum. We are a part of our conditioning. So it's unavoidable for us to usually find the why underneath any kind of learned behavior.
I'm wondering if a lot of stuff doesn't start happening around with kids, especially around the age of 9, let's say, because I think that's when, from what I've read, that's when children start to realize that their parents can die, that terrible things can happen. They could die. There's an awareness that the world is not this safe place that it is when you're really little. And I'm not saying anything about abusive situations with little kids. They realize that shit a lot sooner. But for in a healthy environment, there's that awareness, usually around age 9, is, oh my God, the universe is not what I thought. The world is not. It's frightening. It's possibly frightening. It's possibly dangerous. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do know what you're saying. I think even if we start realizing it at a very young age, we're still realizing it over and over again throughout our lives, right? Like going through different types of existential angst or existential crises or existential isolation, right? I mean, the idea of existentialism is that humans, we're the only ones who have that awareness of our own death, of our own mortality.
Yeah, what's up with that?
It's hard.
Who put that on the menu? Come on. Yeah. I mean, the fact that just as humans that we wrestle with these kinds of things, and, my dog's just running around doing his thing, and he's, if he hurts his leg, he's unhappy. And if he gets his food, he's happy. It's pretty simple. And, we're blessed with this mind that can do all this incredible stuff. And it also can turn on us in these ways that, maybe we don't even expect. Or I guess we'd never expect it really till it starts happening. So how do you take what you do with an individual? Let's say they come to you with an issue. Well, let's pick OCD or whatever. How do you do that with corporations when you deal with companies? Is it group work? Is it individual? The company hires you to come in and say, well, these 5 people have got a lot of problems. I want you to work with them. How does that work?
Well, I usually work with people with schemas. Schemas are core beliefs that we have about ourselves and others and in relationships. And on my website, I have a schema questionnaire. So there are a couple of examples of schemas would be like an abandonment schema or a mistrust schema or a self-sacrifice schema or an entitlement schema. or a subjugation schema. These are core beliefs, and we develop them in childhood. And then when we grow up, we tend, when these core beliefs get triggered for us in relationships, it triggers a whole experience, automatic thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories, urges, a whole physiological experience. And then we tend to do the behaviors that we learned as a way to try to get rid of that pain. Like, for example, if somebody has a core belief that they're going to be abandoned, they might seek excessive reassurance or start attacking or calling over and over again. Where are you? Are you going to leave me? Right. And the more that they do that behavior, the more likely that they are to confirm the very thing that they fear and create a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when I work with individuals or couples or groups or organizations, I help people identify their core beliefs and what are the behaviors that they do with particular thoughts and feelings. And then we clarify values, and the values are like a barometer for what we want to be about. So when I'm working with organizations, it could be with one person, with the CEO, or it could be with employees, or it could be just running a retreat. But there's different ways that I could work with organizations.
Yeah, I love that. I'm sure that with some people, it's the first time in their life they've ever thought about the things that you're bringing up. Like, I actually believe this, and it's not necessarily true. So that's a big eye opener. The idea that perhaps I've been moving through my life, basing it on something that's not really valid.
Yeah, I think about schemas as like a pair of sunglasses. They're like a lens that we see things through. And so when we start noticing our core beliefs, I teach clients how to start noticing the glasses, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of seeing through them, looking at them. And then it is quite ungrounding when you realize that you have this lens, and this lens is not your narrative. It's society's narrative, your mom's narrative, your dad's narrative, maybe the narrative you had at school with your friends. But there's this kind of shock to the system of realizing this whole way in which we're taken over by these beliefs that are not our own. They are our conditioning. And
it's also something that if, an individual is doing that, you can pretty much extrapolate that almost everyone is doing that to some degree. So when somebody says something to you or acts a certain way toward you, it really says more about them than it does about you. Which was a big eye opener for me at one point, which was, that was a big thing to figure out at some point. Like, that maybe that person is judging me or saying something to me based on their worldview, which is, who knows what happened to them before you intersected with them. You really don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I can resonate with that realization. We have to let go of control. It's a double-edged sword. We don't like core beliefs are really painful. We may believe that we're broken or we're unlovable or we're going to be abandoned, but these core beliefs also create a sense of safety and stability. Like the world is predictable. I know what's going to happen. And so it's both really self-destructive and hurtful, and it's also really safe and comfortable and hard to let go of.
Yes, because it's known, it's familiar. Mm-hmm. I was once told that when human beings are confused or frightened, they always go backwards to what they know, and which makes sense because they already know it. I mean, how can you go to something you don't know? You really can't. So that idea of well, see, there it is. I knew people were going to abandon me because they, quote, always do. The always and never syndrome, that happens all the time. That happens all the time. It happens sometimes. I try to notice when people speak to me if they use those kinds of words. This always happens. I'm always this. You never do. You're never there for me. You're always, whatever. And so those things are an interesting thing, especially when you get to know people really well and they start to tell you things in a repeated way, because that's what their familiar way of operating. And that's when you sort of get past personality and all these other things that are sort of initial kind of attraction or a connection with other people. And then you get into who this person is and how they've been molded by their own past.
Yeah, you're referring to a cognitive distortion of black and white thinking, right? Or all or nothing thinking.
What are some of the common things that people come to you with that they would like to work on? And some of it might be mental and emotional. Some of it might be physical. Maybe somebody's struggling with weight. You see, that's a big one. People, I can't seem to lose weight, and there's no sort of obvious physical situation going on with them other than the fact that they're probably overeating. And what's going on there? Do you work with that?
I do work with that. I don't get many people who are coming in just for weight. I think the most common thing is probably relationship issues or transition issues or work-related issues. And then sometimes we get people who have anxiety or OCD or panic attacks and things like that. But I think interpersonal issues are the top things that people come in with. And I think people are lonelier now than ever. I think there's also like a bit of a global trauma response that we're having from the last couple of years that some people are more aware of or less aware of. And I think regardless of our political beliefs or our beliefs about COVID, that has caused all of us some form of trauma, and people are more isolated than before.
Yeah, even though it's okay to get back together and socialize,
right?
People are traumatized by it. They're guarded. I've noticed that myself.
Guarded, yeah.
Yeah, I don't, and it's because if you're living a certain way for X number of years, it's really hard to pull out of that. Like, it's over now, back to what happened before, the way it was before. Well, maybe it's not, because I never had 2 or 3 years of being isolated and afraid, really. I mean, when you think about it, it's not just the isolation. There was a level of fear and even terror on the part of some people. And I know a few people that have not come out of it at all. They don't want to go out. They're still afraid. They're usually, they're older, most of them. And they just, I don't want to catch it. I have a compromised immune system. I have a friend who had something, and I don't want to take that chance. And they got comfortable being isolated too, because I have to say, there's a safety in isolation. When you're alone, you can't get hurt. Nobody can hurt you. You can only, so there is a safety in that too.
Yeah. Yeah. And COVID didn't just bring up fear for people, but it's fear around being around others. Like a hug can kill you, or you could kill someone else. So it is fear of other humans and fear of intimacy, really, that I think people are still getting out of. I mean, not to mention how social media also hurts our interpersonal functioning.
Well, this comes up a lot in my show, and it seems to be across the board. People just are not huge fans or advocates of of social media because of the huge downside. There's some great things about it too that I like. I like watching comedy, and I like learning about health stuff, and I like certain things, but also the false front. It feels really creepy, where you're just like, this is, anybody can be whatever they want for 15 seconds and you don't really know. And so there's a comparison thing that can go on. And there's also this idea that, people are having a better time than you. They're
right.
they're enjoying life in a way that you can't, and it's all, it's smoke and mirrors, but it's especially for younger kids and stuff. How do they know that? How do they know?
I think if I was a teenager during this phase of social media, it would be a scary situation, radically different than what life was.
I was talking to a guy this morning. He was saying how back, when our parents or his parents and my parents, and even my own beginning of my sort of work life, that there was a much more job security, and that people would, people used to get a job somewhere and stay there for decades and then retire, and people getting fired wasn't a thing. It was a rare occurrence. You wanted to have a relationship with the employees and the employers and people being taken care of. So there's this very insecure feeling in terms of livelihood and keeping a job and not being arbitrarily jettisoned for some dumb reason by somebody. So I think there's a lot of sort of economic and social insecurity because of the amorphous kind of job market, just in terms of personal safety with survival.
I don't think it's just at work. I think people are feeling more replaceable and disposable than before in general, in dating, at work, in friendships. The culture is such that, people are ghosting. We have words like situationships and breadcrumbing. There's a way in which probably that adds to the loneliness that people are feeling. It's a way that people are feeling more replaceable. Right now, people are losing their jobs to robots and AI. So it's a strange time.
Well, I remember first sort of realizing that ghosting was a thing, that people were doing it.
Right.
And I remember thinking that should not have a word that makes it okay, like ghosting. That's what you do. And I thought, well, I will never do that, because in my day, not responding to somebody at all was considered incredibly rude and dismissive of the person.
And now we have so much in our vocabulary to describe just making someone replaceable.
Yeah, or so insignificant, you're not going to give them the dignity of responding. And I do it now. I made a statement. I'll never do that. And now I do it because it's been done to me. If I want to be a victim of it, I don't really. I just think it's part of the thing. And I understand it. It's like, well, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, so I'm just going to ghost this person and they'll figure it out themselves. I guess that's the attitude.
I think it creates like a domino effect. So everybody's like a little turtle and they put their head out, they try to be vulnerable and then they get hurt and then they poke their head back in to protect themselves. And then in that process, you end up hurting others, and it just creates this whole domino effect.
Getting sad. Abby, getting a little sad here about where we're headed. I'm not too super sad because, I have enough of a group of people in my life that matter. But I can imagine if I didn't, and I wasn't able to do that for whatever reason, how difficult that would be. So difficult. And like you said, there's more lonely people these days. And you're probably seeing that in your practice.
Yeah, in my practice, in the world, in the research.
And you deal with teenagers a lot?
We have teenagers in the practice, but I don't deal personally with too many.
Okay. I was just curious to see what was going on in that population, because it's always such a super vulnerable time anyway. And then you add these other things we're talking about. I certainly would not. I would not want to be a teenager now, but, I'm not sure it's ever easy, no matter what age, whatever generation you're from.
Agreed. I don't miss being a teenager for sure.
No, not at all. So let me ask you this. You recently wrote an article. We talked a little bit about, not much before we went to record, but you wrote an article about when you're divorced, how to get along or navigate a divorce when you're divorced from somebody who is a narcissist. So let's talk about the word narcissist for a second, because it gets tossed around a lot. I remember having two friends, both of them were stand-up comedians. So they were talking about each other to me about the other one in two different situations, and they both said the other one was a narcissist. It really made me laugh because, first of all, they're stand-up comedians, so they're center of attention people anyway. So
Right.
I kind of enjoyed the fact that this guy's a narcissist. No, this guy. So what is it, and why is it's being so overused as a word and as a label, which we can get into labels in a second if we want, but what is it, and why is this why did you write the article?
Well, I was asked to write the article, so that's why.
Good reason. I hope you got paid too.
But I think the word is probably overused because it's also been underused. So I think in the psychology field, we say that maybe 2% of people have narcissistic personality disorder. I don't think that's the case. We see research now that shows that 1 out of 5 CEOs has antisocial personality disorder, which is a higher version than narcissism. And so we're noticing that this is more common than we thought, and it's pretty misunderstood in the field. And also that people in high positions of power and authority tend to have this diagnosis. And so I think that narcissism might be, an epidemic like loneliness, and quite misunderstood because it's not necessarily that narcissists want to be the center of attention or, narcissists are addicted to narcissistic supply. And there's a misunderstanding that narcissistic supply means that they want adoration, admiration, to be looked up to and to have, positive things said about them. But actually, narcissistic supply is about controlling the narrative, controlling the story, and making sure that the person behaves in a predictable way, in the way that you want them to. So people who have narcissistic personality disorder use a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy or behavioral modification, intermittent reinforcement, to condition you to behave in certain ways, kind of like a remote control. When they press guilt, they want you to beg for forgiveness. And if they press threaten, they want you to do what they want. And so they have a button, and they're trying to get you to behave in predictable ways in the way that they want. And sometimes they may want positive narcissistic supply, you saying great things about them and how awesome they are. But actually, most people with narcissistic personality disorder prefer negative supply, meaning they prefer to see you cry, scream, yell, behave out of alignment with your own values, get into reactive abuse, beg. Things like that actually are more fulfilling than positive regard. But also in reality, people with this disorder are suffering. They're not walking around feeling great about themselves. It is a shame disorder. And so there is a lot of deep shame and a way to avoid their own self-hatred, shame, and dependency, really.
I always thought that people that have that don't realize they have it, or at least deny that they have it, even if it's pointed out. Is that part of it? It's like a situation, a disorder, of a condition that tells you don't have that condition.
Well, the dilemma is that narcissism is quite misunderstood in the field. We don't have good measures for it. We don't have good ways of understanding it. And so there is some truth to it, meaning if you speak to people who are self-aware narcissists, they all say that around 8 or 9 years old, they do realize they're different. They do realize something is wrong. So I don't think it's that narcissists are completely unaware. Yeah. Most clients that I have coming in know something is wrong, whether it's narcissism or borderline or depression or OCD. They come in and they go, I'm anxious, or I'm doing these things. Is this OCD? Is this a phobia? They have some awareness that something is going on. So most people with narcissistic personality disorder start knowing that there is something different about them at quite an early age, around 8 or 9 years old. But then they have a lot of cognitive distortions and ways to evade accountability and throw it back on others and kind of avoid that accountability. But that doesn't mean that they're not aware of it at all. They have it could be anywhere from subconscious to very conscious. But it's very difficult for us to know because people who have NPD also lie. Like quite frequently.
That's the wonderful part, huh?
Yeah, I've had clients who I've diagnosed who have gotten very mad and said, "No, I don't have this." And I've had other clients who have said, "Whoa, this makes a lot of sense. I do have this." And I've had a lot of clients who say, "Yes, this makes a lot of sense. I want to work on this. I don't want to have this disorder. I want to work on my empathy." And then the next day, they don't think they're a narcissist anymore. They don't have object constancy. So just like they can't keep the same person in mind, their thoughts are also not able to stay consistent.
It sounds rather torturous to live that way, especially without empathy, knowing that most people do have empathy and you don't. That would be strange to like, I don't even understand why you're caring about this person or this situation. It's just, I mean, wow, sounds like it would be torture.
Yeah, that's why people with NPD have a lot of envy and anger and jealousy. But, I think the problem is that I don't know personally, but I would imagine that there's some cognitive dissonance around the disorder because in one level, it feels quite torturous. There's a lot of envy and not a lot of capacity for joy or empathy. But if you have the disorder, you may not know that. You may not know that you don't have empathy, meaning we all have our own subjective experience. So we don't know what kind of empathy other people have. So
Right.
People with NPD often project that others don't have empathy or others have the same intentions that they have. But as torturous as it is, there's still a way in which certain narcissistic behaviors work in society, which I think is problematic. We have to ask ourselves as a system, why is it that people with a lack of empathy are more likely to be your boss? Why are people with a lack of empathy more likely to get very high positions in authority and in systems that probably would be better to have a person with empathy?
Well, part of it, I think, is because they're very driven to do that, and they don't care about the mess they leave behind. They're just going forward. But they're driven to on some level to with a belief that if they get further and further up the ladder, they'll be better, they'll feel better. And it's not just to be an asshole. There's actually a drive to think that that's going to fix whatever is the disturbance, and so there's an avarice for that a well-balanced person might not have to certainly to that degree, where to the exclusion of other things.
Yeah, I don't think it's their drive, because you could have empathy and be very ambitious and driven. So it's not that they're driven or more driven, it's that they use particular strategies. They use particular strategies that people are not aware are actual strategies. So like DARVO, deny, attack, reverse victim offender, or blame shifting or gaslighting. There's these strategies that they use that end up working out in society. We don't call it out. We don't punish the behavior. We end up rewarding their behavior. And the more behavior gets rewarded in society, the more it grows.
Yeah, you get to see it all the time. I'm sure you've had this where you're with somebody or a situation and you're starting to feel crazy, and where normally you don't. And you think, am I crazy? this person is really making me feel, or I'm allowing them to make me feel crazy by what they're doing. And my sort of conclusion with that is, if someone's making me feel crazy, and I never feel crazy, almost never, that it's them, that they're doing something that doesn't make sense on some level, that doesn't feel right, that's just off. And it's, you say, oh, it's crazy making. I like that.
The dilemma is that when you're dealing with someone with NPD, when the strategies work, it's not just them that make you feel crazy. They divide and conquer. So you have half of if you're working in an organization and your boss or your manager has NPD, they're not the only ones that are making you feel crazy. There's half of the people that believe they're crazy. So it's much easier if you have one person who's making you feel crazy and you go, oh, they're gaslighting me. This, I'm not crazy. But if you have a person that's gaslighting you, and then half of the other people are being gaslit, and you have 50 people that go, this is the nicest, sweetest person, and they're doing this for you, and everything is great, then you're more likely to feel crazy. I mean, I think that there's a lot of divisions in the world. Look at politics, what's going on globally. People don't know who's the victim and who's the perpetrator. People aren't able to distinguish. So I think narcissism always occurs in a system. It's never just you and that person. It is a social issue. A person with NPD can't really have a diagnosis without other people
being impacted in some way,
or feeding it, right? Feeding the disorder.
I'm glad we're talking about this stuff. I haven't really delved into this too much, so I find it interesting that it seems so pervasive these days, or maybe just that there's so much attention on it because we have access to all these constant input of information, so we get to see all this stuff.
I would say it is pervasive.
And the thing is, if you want to keep your job, which is your income, you have to swallow a certain amount of truth and put it to the side and not say anything and put up with it. You have to really kind of navigate those kind of people. And they know that you have to do. So
Right.
It gives them a certain leverage to do more of the same. And it's a very tricky thing to navigate in the workplace. And I think that's why there's a lot of stress in workplaces just on that level.
It makes me feel really glad that I work for myself. But it is a problem in our society that somehow the people that get to the top are people that use certain covert strategies, and that we allow it to work in such a way. And then people in those positions of power, because when somebody does have narcissistic personality disorder, it's a lose-lose situation. There's not much you can do. At some point, they will turn on you, whether you're admiring them for the rest of their lives. That's just what they do, and it's not personal.
Yeah.
But then you're stuck, and you have to put up with it because you don't have an option in that kind of situation.
Right. It's just a matter of when and how severe. I remember I had this one job, and I won't say what it was, but I managed to, I lasted a lot longer than other people who were getting fired. And somebody asked me, well, how were you able to stay in that situation? I said, I never danced too close to the flame.
Mm-hmm.
I made sure I just didn't ingratiate myself or piss anybody off, and that's, that was my strategy to survive in that situation because, I love my family and I wanted them to have money to do the things they wanted to do. So, am I any genius? Not really. I just figured out that was probably the best way to navigate a situation that I saw, people falling left and right.
Right. Yeah, it's best to keep things very brief and have everything on record and write things down and not take things too personally. Just watch the movie, talk very little, and walk away from the situation.
Right. What would you say to somebody, the sort of the keys to leading a life, whether it's work or personal life or, whatever it is? What do you find that the main things are that make someone's life work very well? Things to keep in mind, because I know people listen to this and they're going to understand everything we're talking about because they've experienced it. And sometimes people feel like, well, what do I do? What are some of the tools that I can do without going to therapy, or with, just moving through a difficult work situation, or they're struggling in their primary relationships, or they're dealing with, kids who aren't behaving in the way that they would like, or, problems with neighbors. There's so many different things that kind of come at us all the time. What are the tools that you sort of find have worked best for people?
The first thing is being really clear about your values and what you stand for. So values are 100% within our control. So values are the way we want to be. What kind of partner do you want to be? What kind of coworker do you want to be? What kind of boss do you want to be? What kind of friend do you want to be? What kind of father do you want to be? And so the clearer we are about a set of values, every choice we make is then we ask ourselves, is this behavior moving me towards this set of values, or am I doing this behavior as a way to avoid pain? So if I have, for example, a self-sacrifice schema, it's a core belief that other people's needs come above mine, and I'm selfish if I prioritize myself, and somebody asks me if they could borrow my car, and I don't think about it, I go, yes, you could borrow my car. I'm probably doing that as a way to avoid feeling guilty. I don't want to feel bad. And so, okay, you could borrow my car. And so we are kind of programmed to continue to do behaviors as a way to avoid pain. But once we clarify our values, what we want to be about out of our free choice, then we can choose to do a behavior that is in alignment with what we want to be about: being assertive, being kind, being honest, being authentic, being collaborative. So I could say, yes, you could borrow my car because I'm moving towards being generous. Or I could say, yes, you could borrow my car because I want to avoid feeling guilty, and I don't want to have thoughts about being selfish. And so I want to push away the pain, let you borrow my car. But in the long run, that's really going to harm me. It only in the short term, it gets rid of pain. In the long run, it makes the pain worse and worse, just like any addiction, really.
That's a really interesting thing. So it comes from, really figuring out what works for you, and not being afraid of what the response might be from the other person, because you're already sticking to what you believe in and what works for you. I had a friend once, he calls me up and I forget what the favor was. He goes, can I, let's just say, can I borrow your car? And I said, no, it wasn't that, but let's just say. And he goes, well, why not? He pushed. I go,
Right.
my answer was, because I don't want to help you. He started laughing, and
Right.
I started laughing. He brought that up for a couple of years. He thought it was like the greatest thing, that it was such a baldly, honest and, answer. Now, why I didn't want to help him, I don't know. I don't even know if that was the real reason, but that really is what it came down to. I don't want to do it. And I didn't really offer an explanation, which brings me to another thing. Just because somebody asks you a question doesn't mean you have to answer it. And just because they ask for an explanation doesn't mean you have to give one.
It's so funny you say that. I just had a session last week where I said that to a client, and she was blown away. She was like, oh my goodness, I've never not answered somebody's question. And I was like, yeah, it's called boundaries. Like, we do not owe somebody an explanation just because they go, why? I don't have to give you a why to my no. No is just no.
Complete sentence.
Yeah. So I think the more that we explain and defend our no's, the more likely someone is to continue pushing and asking for more explanations and pushing that boundary.
There's always that technique of answering a question with another question. Like,
right.
What makes you think I owe you an explanation? which is a little bit sassy, but it's kind of great at the same time.
I think that when you say no to somebody, when you act in alignment with your values, when you're deeply authentic with yourself and what you want to stand for, you could let go of the outcome, because everything that happens is information about that other person. If you yourself are not behaving in alignment with your values and what you stand for, you're always wondering, is this person just a jerk, or am I a part of this dynamic? But when you're clear that you're in alignment with what you stand for, all the rest of the information is just about that person. So if you say no and somebody keeps pushing, then maybe they have an entitlement schema, or maybe they have a hard time with boundaries. But it's better to see that than say yes all the time and never get that information about the other person.
Yeah, well, there's an interesting phenomena that I've seen happen with somebody I know who's a bit of a people pleaser, and she stopped doing it. She realized that that's what she was doing. And the people that expected her to continue to be that really were pissed off. They did not like that at all.
Yeah.
And it was, she's like, man, they hate me now. Maybe. Or they feel entitled. Well, you did it before. Why can't you do it now? You've turned on me. You were always so this way, and now you're not doing that. Really interesting. So you see, in the long run, by not sticking to what what we're talking about, sticking to your beliefs and your clear boundaries, you actually hurt yourself in the long run. The people dislike you even more than they would if you.
It creates the self-fulfilling prophecy of exactly what it is that you fear. So you don't want people to dislike you, but then they end up disliking you more because you train them to think that everything is always going to be a yes, and they're always going to get what they want. And the dilemma is that actually makes people more disappointed than happy.
Having a clear boundary could be considered by some people as being selfish in some way, or maybe that's a tool that they would use to get you to acquiesce. Well, you're being really selfish. I mean, all I asked you for was this. Well, I don't want to do it,
Right. I think why do we have such an issue with the word selfish? What's wrong with taking care of oneself? Meaning it's never selfish to say no. It's never selfish to take care of yourself. It's selfish to violate someone's boundary when they say no. It's selfish to harm somebody else in the process of taking care of yourself. But taking care of yourself, I think we need a kind of re-narrating of the word selfish.
I like that very much, because it's a word that can be used as a weapon rather than, and that's not a good thing to do. So I found for myself that if I'm sticking to what I believe and my boundaries are clear and my beliefs are clear, but I'm also trying to be kinder, and I'm also trying to have compassion for what the other person is experiencing. So if I can mix those things together in a way, it's a successful day if I can do that. And, you get better at it. You do. If you're practicing it, you get better at it. So it's a great way to move through life. And why I wasn't really taught that, I don't know, but had to figure it out on my own.
We're not taught the important things. We're taught math and calculus and other things that aren't very important, but we don't get taught about our feelings, our needs, how to communicate, how to take care of ourselves. It's very sad that we don't get taught these things. But I think to your point, you were discussing the nuances of what you want to be about, and that is the way that values are always a set of values. So if my value is just to be honest, and somebody says, how does this dress look on me? And I say, you look like a fat cow. That may not be moving me towards a set of values. But if I want to be honest and kind and authentic and assertive, then you get closer to the nuances of coming up with an action that is in alignment with a set of values. and you move more and more towards your own rules of what you really want to be about, not your conditioning and what society or your mom or your dad thinks you should do, but what you genuinely want to be about in your life. When you're on your deathbed and you're facing yourself, you know that you acted in the way that mattered to you.
I think about that idea of being on my deathbed or knowing I'm going to die, at a certain point. And I thought about this. I don't know why. I just always have as a kid. I even thought about it, not in a morbid way, but in terms of doing or not doing something. And the idea of being on my deathbed and not having tried something that I wanted to try was such a horrible feeling to me, that I would try stuff that other people wouldn't try because they were afraid, or, what if it doesn't work out? Well, what if it doesn't? So what? Because to me, it's worse to, if there is such a thing as failure, to fail, it's worse to fail. It's worse to not have tried something and wonder, could you have done it, than have tried it and not had it work out. That doesn't scare me. The other one does, though. At the end of the game, that scares me.
Right.
And I in everything I've read is that people's regrets at the end of their life is just that I didn't do this thing that I always wanted to do, or I didn't try this thing.
There's research that shows that people who think about their death more are more likely to make more meaningful choices in their life, and that it brings fulfillment, because the more we think about our own mortality, the more we think about what really matters and getting to the present moment and living, a fulfilled life.
Yeah, it puts you in the big picture.
Yeah.
Like nothing else.
There's a lot of therapeutic interventions about thinking about the end of your life.
I mean, there's some Buddhist meditations where guided meditations that talk about that. I've done a couple of them, and it's pretty intense, but it certainly puts you into what's important. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I've enjoyed talking to you. I know we've talked a long time, which I've enjoyed every minute of it.
It's been fun.
Yes. And is there anything we would like to, is there anything you would like to promote or talk about? Certainly your website. I don't know if you have a new book out, or if there's things people can find there. Let's talk about all things Abby Lev.
Sure. You could visit my website, Bay Area CBT Center.com, and that's the website where we do in-person therapy in California. And then we also have a website, cbtonline.com, and that's for online therapy all over the states, including online courses and webinars, trainings, videos, and lots of resources, as well as the schema questionnaire and a workplace schema questionnaire. And I've written 3 books, and you could find those on the websites as well.
I would recommend, not having seen the specifics of your schema questionnaire, but having done something very similar on my own, that people go and do that, because there is something about looking at what you believe in every single area of your life that'll open up possibilities that you never really saw before. And I'm talking about, what do I think about money? What do I think about how I look? What do I think about what other people's intentions are? What do I think about what parenting means? I mean, there's a million things that you can look at what you actually believe, and you may be surprised at what some of the answers are. I certainly was when I did this thing, and I didn't do it at your website. I did it many years ago in a therapy situation, and it was so helpful. And I'm glad that you do stuff like that.
Yeah, I tell people when they look at their schema questionnaires that this is not a personality test, or it's not something that happens to you. It's just measures your own beliefs. So none of the things in the questionnaire are facts. It's just what you think about yourself and others. So it's things that you've convinced yourself are facts, but they're actually just a lens. But the questionnaire is, I have to say, quite accurate and extremely accurate and interesting. Like if I have a couple coming into couples therapy and both of them email me their schema questionnaire, 90% of the time I'm able to know their dynamic in their relationship at like a 90%. It's once you see enough of the schemas, you get a real sense of their flavor, and it's then becomes very easy to know how a person thinks, what they're feeling, and how they tend to behave in certain situations. And there are certain schemas that are attracted to one another, like perfectionism and failure, or subjugation and abandonment, or entitlement and self-sacrifice. And so the clearer you are about your beliefs, also, you're going to have a better radar for what kind of partner you want to pick, so that you're not continuing this type of schema chemistry or repetition compulsion in your relationships.
Yeah. And none of these things are, I wouldn't put the label of good or bad on them. I would just ask myself this simple question: is how is that working for me? That's the question I ask all the time to myself. It's like, is this behavior or this thought process, is it working or not? If it's working, I'm going to keep doing it. And if it's not, well, I better do something else.
Yeah. And then it takes a lot of therapy to help people get to that place, that point where they realize they have that choice, where they could choose to take a new action, and they can choose to experiment in such a way where it actually does change your beliefs. We can't control our thoughts, but if we do different behaviors, it creates conditions for us to disconfirm those beliefs. And then we rewire the brain. Only through consistent actions and emotionally restorative experiences do we actually rewire our brain and our belief system.
Yeah, I used to be somebody that would never say nice things to people when I would notice them. Not that I didn't say nice things to people, I did.
Right.
But if I would notice something about somebody, I would, well, they already know it. I'm going to look like a kiss ass if I say it. It's going to come off insincere, so I had a lot of reasons not to do that. But I realized that there was a lack of vulnerability on my part and a distance from other people because of that. That was one of the things. So I decided that everyone I met, and I obviously I don't do this every day all the time because it would be exhausting, but that when I would do this periodically, I would say everyone I meet today, let's say, is going to be, I'm going to tell them something nice about them. I'm going to compliment them, and I have to mean it. I can't be insincere. I have to mean it. I have to say it from the heart. Whether it's, gosh, I really love your laugh. It's very infectious. Now, and the thing is, when people would say stuff like that to me, I loved it. Mm-hmm. And why I was not doing that kind of a thing, I didn't want to be vulnerable. That's really the bottom line. I just didn't want to be vulnerable. So I tried it, and the results were incredible. I was like, oh, this is like very minimal. Well, it actually wasn't minimal effort. It was Herculean effort at first.
Right.
I never hadn't done it. But as I started to do it, it became something that I got very comfortable with. And not only did I see the results, I saw how good I felt, and I saw how good it made other people feel. And it was absolutely sincere. So I basically willed myself to be sincere.
Yeah, it sounds again like you really clarified your values: being sincere, being vulnerable, being authentic, and being kind. And then that moved you towards what I would call a values-based action, which is giving somebody a compliment. Yeah. And I think, with all of the social media and psychology becoming all popular nowadays, I think there's a misunderstanding that changing our behaviors or our beliefs is much easier. You could just tap, and release emotions and, rewire your brain by just thinking something else. But the reality of it is that it's not that easy, and really doing that work is more like what you described. It's really making friends with very difficult sensations and experiences in our body that we've been pushing away, and being able to relate to our mind in such a way where we don't buy every single automatic thought, and being able to do behavioral experiments and test out our thoughts. And really, it takes a lot of work to to rewire the brain and do new behaviors, and it's in those new experiences that real change happens.
Yeah, it's kind of like going to the gym. You're not going to get strong in one day or 2 days. It has to be ongoing and consistent, and you got to really think about what you're doing. But that's a commitment to wanting to do something to make your life better. So that's why you're here. That's why I'm here. We did it together today, folks. I hope you enjoyed the show. I certainly enjoyed talking to Abby, and I will put your website and all that information in the show description. And best of luck to you and all the folks at your center.
Thanks. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Abby. Have a great day.
You too.
Much appreciation for you folks listening to The Exploding Human. The website is theexplodinghuman.com. The YouTube channel is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. Once again, I want to thank Abby Lev for all her wonderful insights and her great work in cognitive behavioral therapy. You can find her online. Have a fantastic day. Thanks so much.